Hey guys, so I want to talk to you today about 3 books that I hope you leave here wanting to check out. The first one is called Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. The second one is Hey Kiddo by Krosoczka. And the third one is Educated by Tara Westover. So all 3 of these stories have something in common. All 3 of them are about home and family and how they affected the authors for better or worse. Now, each of us are affected by the families and the homes that we live in. And so I want you to start thinking about yours and how it has helped to shape and mold who you are today. So think about, do you live in a house or an apartment? Do you live in the city or the country? Is it full of family members or do you just have a few? Is it mainly quiet or is it loud? So as you're thinking through these things and how that environment has helped to shape the person that you've become today, I'm going to start talking about these 3 stories. One other thing that I want you to keep in mind as we're going through them is that they're all similar in that they're all memoirs. And so a memoir is kind of like an autobiography. It is about the author. So that means the main character in each book is the author themselves, but it's a little different. A memoir is a genre of literature where the author writes about his or her memories, usually going back to childhood. So the first book that we're going to talk about today is Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming, and I just love this book. It's actually written in the form of poetry. So you can see here, almost every page has a title. As you're going through, you can see lots of titles. The format of it is poetic stanzas. And so it's visually interesting as you're going through. The titles are very meaningful to each section, but although they are separate, they all work together in one narrative. The story is all about Jacqueline as a child from the time of her birth through probably around late elementary school. From the very beginning of the book, she talks about being an infant in Ohio and how she was pulled in several directions because of her family moving. Her family split apart when she was younger. Her dad stayed in Ohio as her and her siblings and her mom moved to South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and they actually lived in a town called Nicholtown. So if you're familiar with Greenville, you might know that area. She also ends up in New York. And so she recounts throughout her childhood the importance of family and what that looked like, what it meant to her and how it impacted her. She had a dream throughout the entire book, and that was to become a writer. And so she had not only struggles with stability within her family, but she had struggles learning how to write, even though that desire was so strong from the minute that she knew what writing was. She talks about how simultaneously the South, she says she was born as the South explodes. And so there was segregation that was ending. The civil rights movement was very active when she was born. And so that is something that kind of goes along with her narration. The instability within her family sort of mirrored the instability that was going on in society around her at the time. And so her grandparents greatly affected her. They were very Southern. They lived in South Carolina, and they were, always having hot biscuits on the table. Her granddad was always humming a tune. They were hard workers, very stereotypically Southern, and they were kind of strict. And her mom as well, they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they had high expectations for their children. So by the time that she moved to New York, she felt very Southern, very rooted, and that she just was not going to ever call that home, she said. She talks about being able to define yourself in a variety of ways, that you don't have to define yourself as one type of person. The next book we're going to talk about is Krosoczka's Hey Kiddo, and this is a fantastic graphic novel. It recounts his story of growing up with a mother who was essentially absent. She was a drug addict, and his disappointment in his mother runs pretty deep, which is apparent from a lot of the letters. He actually includes real letters throughout the book that his mom wrote him. So you kind of get an idea of just how absent that she was for a lot of big events in his life and how that impacted him. So Jarrett's outlet from the time he was little dealing with all of this is drawing. And so obviously he ends up making a career out of this. So even though his family life was not great at all, he was able to use that as inspiration to build a career, which obviously he's very successful now. He incorporates a lot of drawings. You can see this one of his grandmother that he drew growing up. So throughout the graphic novel, there's tons of really personal touches. He also even includes imagery of wallpaper that he remembers being on his grandparents' wall. Like Woodson, Krosoczka was raised by his grandparents primarily. Woodson's grandparents were very typically Southern, very proper. They treated them very well. Krosoczka's grandparents, they were there for him. They were very dependable, but they also struggled with their own issues such as anger and instability within their own marriage. So this book is a fantastic read, and you really are able to see again that theme throughout the book, that within all of this instability, here is Jarrett Krosoczka with that dream of wanting to draw for a living, and he ends up obviously doing just that. So the last book we're going to talk about is Tara Westover's Educated. This book was very moving. This was written in traditional prose, so you can see it's unlike the other two. It's not poetry or a graphic novel. And in her memoir, Tara Westover recounts growing up in a home that was very secluded in a place called Bucks Peak in Idaho. Her family were Mormons, and they sort of had their own version of Mormonism. They did not believe at all in public education, government, modern medicine, anything of that nature. They thought as a whole in the family, the dad was the leader and females really had no say or not much power. And so growing up, Westover experienced quite a bit of abuse, primarily from her brother, whose name was Sean. He sort of terrorized her from the time that she can remember. This story starts out when she's very young, and it goes through college. So it recounts her essentially escaping her abuse and her family situation to make it to college. She did not go to any formal public education. Her family homeschooled her. So it's sort of an undoing. She kind of realizes that her mind has been filled with a lot of things that weren't necessarily true. Now, this story was an adult novel that sort of crossed over into the young adult genre. Because it's just so good. It's so fascinating, and it's just so very sad. She realizes when she gets out into the world how little that she was told about the real world. She didn't, for example, know what the Holocaust was. She had never heard of it. And so, of course, she was very embarrassed when she revealed that in a college class. And so the story also includes a lot of times that the family needed help but chose not to get it. For example, when they were in a car wreck and her mother almost died, her mother was changed forever after that, having to live with migraines and memory loss. Her father was severely injured, severely burned, and so was her brother when they were scrapping in the junkyard, which was what they primarily did for an income. They chose not to receive any medical help from that. And so the story, again, is just fantastic. It is sad, it's moving, but it also contains the same theme as the other stories as well, that here is this person experiencing not the greatest childhood, but they still retain their dream and their desire to escape that and to become who they feel like they're meant to become and be. And that's exactly what Westover does. So I hope you enjoyed our talk about Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming Krosoczka's Hey Kiddo and Westover's Educated. I hope that you take a minute to check one of these 3 very similar but very different books out. Whether you like poetry, graphic novel, or traditional prose, I'm sure that you'll find something here that you'll like. And hearing people's personal stories and how they were affected is always interesting. So I hope that you choose one to read. Regardless, read something. Have a great week.